Do you think UFOs, the paranormal, weird history, cryptozoology, and outsider art are pretty darn cool? Then you're in the right place. Welcome to High Strangeness with your host, Steve Berg.
The video version. Well, hello, my friends. Welcome back to another episode of High Strangeness. Tonight, I have a wonderful guest. This man's name is John Wenz. John, how the hell are you doing, pal?
Oh, I'm doing all right. How about you, Steve?
I'm doing pretty good, man. I'm hanging in there. You know, there's a lot of crazy stuff going on in the world, so I'm trying to keep it positive, but buddy, it gets hard sometimes.
Yeah, I feel like, that we're just a little bit away from a real scary time.
Yeah, I hope this era isn't one of those eras, or like this year isn't one of those years we'll look back in like 2 years ago and go, oh, remember how good we had it then?
Yeah. No, I've enjoyed, if nothing else, for the last 4 years, being able to forget we had a president some days. That would be a great feeling.
Yeah. Isn't that, not to have it on the forefront of your mind 24/7. But
yeah, I don't see a new weird thing that was said.
Yeah, exactly.
I could just like ignore it. I could have to remind myself who.
Oh yeah, that would be well. Let's strive for that. Let's strive for that, pal. Oh my gosh, folks. John and I got to know each other not that long ago. Gosh, maybe 5-6 months ago, and he is a fellow Nebraska native, and we share a common love for Weird Nebraska. And John, I gotta tell you, you are a formidable researcher of Weird Nebraska because I sort of like, I mean, and I know this isn't true, but I always feel like, oh, I probably know everything, and because I'm such a nerd. But like, I discovered that I did not know a lot of the things you're telling me about, and so we became fast buddies, and it has been just such a pleasure to have someone to bounce these obscure stories off of from Nebraska.
Absolutely. Like every time I discover something new, like reading through Valley or whoever, it's like I gotta tell Steve about this. I think I've even sent you screenshots of the back of Fate magazine advertisements where it's just like some guy is trying to sell like a time machine out of his garage or something.
Yes, please. That's what we're here for.
Yeah. I feel like there's some like undiscovered Nebraska weirdness there too, because there's definitely been some people that have clearly been trying to get. I would hope they're just occult circles, but maybe they were trying to get an actual cult going. Who knows?
Right.
Like, I'm seeking other spiritual seekers in the area, and it's just like, oh, please, just be some more like, and not like the next Michael Ryan or something.
Yeah, well, I thought maybe we would mention Michael Ryan and the whole Rulo Doomsday Yahweh cult because it's one of the scariest things I've ever. I actually just got done reading the book Dark Harvest.
Yeah, Evil Harvest is a wild.
Evil Harvest, man. I'll tell you what. I was like reading, like there's that one section where the really horrible stuff happens. I was on an airplane and I'm like, good God, I'm looking at vomit. It was so troubling.
Yeah. I used to be a lot more of a true crime person, and that book was like, that was even brutal by some of the standards of like what I was reading at the time. So it was like, whew. Yeah.
Well, the thing is that not that they're totally related, but I do think, I mean, like, I'll bring up an example, a Nebraska example. But Richardson, or like, I mean, there were a lot of times where there is a lot of high strangeness, there is sometimes a lot of true crime.
Yeah.
Not always, that's not like a rule, but it's hard not to notice that, like, oh, well, weird.
Yeah, I think, places end up with energies.
Mm-hmm.
And, I don't even mean that necessarily metaphysically, but like people get kind of like an attitude from where they're around that like can lead to strange things, metaphysical or very, very real.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, like, not to bring up a Twin Peaks reference, but think about Twin Peaks. It's like that show. It's almost an occult detective show, but there's also like really crazy true crime.
Oh yeah,
it's kind of that balance of where it's a true crime show, but also 100% metaphysical and occult laden.
Yeah, no, and like I hadn't even realized like the extent to which it was until I like rewatched it as an adult instead of
Right.
like, you know, some idiot just trying to make it through college.
Yeah.
But racking up overdue fees to like Audio Visual Video Center, which is a very Lincoln reference.
Well, speaking of Lincoln, speaking of Nebraska, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where you actually from in Nebraska, and kind of how you got into this stuff, and a little bit about your writing. And please.
Yeah. So I'm originally from North Platte, born and raised. I ended up going to the University of Nebraska, where I got an English degree. And at the time I was writing for my college newspaper, which was bringing me into contact with a lot of the weird stuff. So when I started listening to your podcast, that's actually when I reached out and was like, oh, I wrote about some of this like 20 years ago. Have you ever heard of this?
Yeah.
And I think it was, I think it was Danny Lisko was originally the name I was throwing out to you.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, today I'm a professional writer and, trying to get art stuff going as well. So a lot of Fortean based art.
Hell yes.
So yeah, although oddly I've most of my like writing career has been as a science writer. So
that's cool as hell though. I want to hear more about that.
Yeah. So it's kind of diametrically opposed to this like interest in the weirder things in some ways, although space gets plenty weird and the like scientific explanations for things can be plenty weird as well.
Sure.
Yeah.
That's amazing. I didn't know you were a science writer. Ooh, that's neat.
Yeah. Mostly stuff around like astronomy, astrophysics, planetary science stuff. So
that is so cool.
Yeah.
Damn.
And then I kind of left full-time journalism and I'm now like a copywriter at a boring day job, but I still get my writing out there. So
good. Well, when you're a writer, when you're an actor, when you're a musician, it's like, you can be an idealist and hopefully the cool gigs come, or you always do your cool thing on the own, but like you got to get paid too. And it is not easy to get paid in the arts.
Yeah, no, the media industry is crunching hard right now, and I kind of had to do what was right for me, but like I said, I still write, I still get my writing out there. So like I haven't quite been able to leave it behind, but
don't ever leave it.
It started being like the like moon lighting career.
Right. Yeah, I hear you. Well, everyone's got a side hustle nowadays.
Yeah.
So I was mentioning to you that I had like literally, I think it was about 10, 12 minutes before we hopped on. I was just looking on the Phantom and Monsters website, which is Lon Strickler's wonderful website where he gets a bunch of kind of, humanoid, high strange Bigfoot, UFO. I mean, like really crazy Fortean cases. Yeah. And the headline for this one was, I don't know if you can see it, folks, but I'll read the description. It says, alien invasion at military school near Omaha, Nebraska.
All right.
Alien invasion, my friend. And all that's written about it is a series of events at a military school near Omaha, Nebraska seems to suggest that there had been a possible alien incursion. Uniformed officials questioned the school staff. That's all I have on it for now. I actually right away fired off a message to Lon Strickler, like, I'd like to know more about this.
Yeah, if I have any frustration with that site, it's like, this needs more paragraphs. Why are there so few paragraphs?
I always want to volunteer to write for it because I'm like, there is quite a few like Nebraska cases in there.
Oh yeah,
one including like a Gumby alien, which I want to talk about later, but some really like out there super surreal stuff.
Yeah, I appreciate the ability of that site to like pull things. I don't know, because you don't have a lot of places like that are like pulling lore,
right?
Whether it's like out of archives or still managing to find somebody's probably anecdotal report, but like
Mm-hmm.
that's still, these things are still, if nothing else, like good folklore, good mythology, good storytelling.
The stories are what matter, man.
Yeah. Well,
Like
and that's how I got a lot of interest in these things was like the did you ever read the Storyteller's Ghost Stories books by Dwayne Hutchinson?
no.
He was like a pastor and like a folklorist in the Lincoln area, and as he went around, he would like collect ghost stories, and so he had 3 volumes of a book, and they worked really well with like scary stories to tell in the dark, where there were a lot of like folkloric and like mythological roots to these things, so that
Oh.
even if you're like repeating these things, like they have like a rich history to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so like I loved those books when I was a kid, and I came up also in the era of like unsolved mysteries and
Oh, me too.
Ghostbusters and everything else. So I
Yes.
feel like I latched onto those, and that also made it, so I've never quite left wanting to find the new and interesting story that's happened out there. But now
Right.
I know more about this.
Well, me too. Me too. Hopefully,
This school. So
I mean, look, and there. Well, we'll talk about. There's a couple current things going on in Nebraska. Obviously, the alien incursion at a military school outside of Omaha will definitely. That's one of them. But there's been a lot of current Bigfoot action in the Omaha, like outside of Omaha, which is super fun.
yeah, no, I've like needed your updates.
Yeah, well, we're going to talk about in the Patreon hangout tomorrow night, but we'll definitely get into a little bit of the juice tonight. So, kind of what I want to do is this will be my first kind of like, or the first like dedicated Nebraska episode, and this is probably going to have to be a multi-part series. But I want to just give people kind of like a brief overview because like there's so many great stories in Nebraska, but they're really not out there very much. Like you have to really work hard to get a lot of these stories.
Yeah. I mean, like, and I think that's half of how we like became buddies. Was like bouncing on. Well, do you know this one? Do you know this one? Hey, look what I just found in the back of a book. Like,
right. Well, you were kind of the first person I ever met who I was like, oh, this guy actually knows these obscure stories about Nebraska, like that I do, and they're not in books. Like you have to like pound the pavement to get these stories,
Yeah. And yeah, I think especially because so many of the like people in Nebraska who research these things have like passed away, or
that's the sad case.
Really gotten quiet, because I do think there was kind of like a generational gap there. Like it almost skipped some years to where we're now every time I'm like, oh, I think I found somebody you could talk to, and then I find their obituary, and
I know
it's
I have run into that. I mean, just to kind of reference what I think what maybe the coolest ever like group that was ever in Nebraska was the Fortean Research Society, and that was a Lincoln, Nebraska based research society that actually like investigated a lot of cases, so much so that the local police, if there was a Bigfoot sighting or UFO sighting, were just calling and handing out. They were like, hey, we have to go break up a frat party. We don't have time to look for the Bigfoot that was taking this woman's apples at her orchard. Do you guys want to go look at it? And they would wear like trench coats, and they were like, it was like the 80s. They had cool hair and mustaches, but they were out there doing the good work.
Yeah.
And that group consisted of Ray Boucher, who's the only one who's still alive. Ray is the protagonist in Nick Redfern's Final Events book, and he's a quasi-known Fortean ufologist.
Oh yeah.
Scott Colburn, he actually had his show predates Art Bell's show, exploring the unexplained phenomena
on KZUM. I used to listen to that on set. Scott Colburn took my aura once at a psychic fair event at what was that? There was like a new age bookstore in Lincoln for a while.
Oh, was it Pegasus?
It wasn't Pegasus. It was Pegasus is Bay Area, I think.
Is that God?
Yeah. No, it was like Third. I can't remember. Light something in the name. They had a psychic fair that some friends and I went to. I think for the paper because we thought it'd be fun.
Hell yeah.
And so yeah, I got my aura read there, and it not only ended up in like the school newspaper because I was clearly writing about it, but like I had some broadcast journalism friends, so there's some clip out there somewhere about me like, you know, going on a rant about how you can't steal my energy from me after. Like, this stuff should be fun.
That's great, man. That's great. Well, Scott was awesome. Him and I became kind of buddies the last couple of years of his life, and I was on his show a couple times, and he was in the process of giving me a ton of old files and research write-ups. And then he passed away, and I talked to his co-host. He said, well, all of Scott's files ended up at the end of his street into a garbage landfill.
Oh jeez.
And I started like crying. I was like, oh my God. Like that is like the history of Weird Nebraska just being thrown away.
Yeah, no, that's terrible. Yeah, especially because like, you know, like we were just saying, there's a generational gap there. There's like both like a missing, like that's missing a piece of history, but also like a connective tissue between what they did and what you're doing now, where I don't think there were a lot of people stepping in there. Like there was a semi-active, you know, Omaha MUFON group, but
Right.
like, you know, that's kind of siloed to one area of strangeness versus the kind of
yeah. I actually right when I moved back, the first thing I did was to contact them, and Dr. Jack Casher, who is a very legit like physicist, legit guy. He's now retired. He's fairly old, but and he's the uncle of Tim Casher of the band Cursive, which is wonderful. I took him and 3 of the other old timer MUFON guys out, and they were like, well, we meet at this Chinese buffet every other month. And that's kind of and I was like, great, can I come? And he's like, of course. So I show up there, I'm there 5 minutes early, but they're already like eating, and they're like just crushing lo mein, not talking to each other. And I came in with this like, you know, young, unbridled enthusiasm. I'm like, so what about those crop circle cases in 1987? They're like, I don't know. And they
like coming up on the old men at the diner you thought were telling the cool story, and then
yeah.
oh, who's this guy? Yeah.
They were, I think I annoyed them to death with like, they're like, Jesus, this guy, chill out.
yeah, no. I mean, but it's hard when it's like you're finding like the people with your interest, but you're kind of new to them, where it's always like, oh God, I think I got, you know. But
right.
Like, I talked with Dr. Casher a few times, you know, back when I was kind of reporting on stuff with the paper, and I always had great interactions. He was always just there as a resource, whether I like had a question about something.
Yeah. No, he's a cool guy. I really like Jack.
Yeah. So
I started going to his UFO because my dad taught at the same university he did. And so my dad was the one who introduced me to him when I was like 12 or 13. And my dad, I got an independent study in 7th grade to get out to go to his monthly lectures. Yeah. And I'd have to write about him, which was amazing. But that's when it started happening. My mom would pick me up from school, then drop me off at my dad's office. And then my dad would walk me down to the UFO lecture. Like, I think my dad was like, oh God, I wish my son was just normal. But
there weren't a lot of UFO lectures in North Platte, so I'm quite jealous of that. That would have been,
it was cool.
It would have been exactly the kind of thing I needed, because I always felt like, you know, I was usually the only person in like the 001 area of the Dewey Decimal System.
Right. Well, I was the only one of my friends. I certainly kept it hidden from them that I was a weirdo.
Yeah. I had a couple friends that were into it. One of whom still, you know, messages me things every now and then, but it's some of the like modern military UFO stuff. And I'm like, I don't touch this.
Yeah, it's all bullshit. Sorry.
No. No. Good way to get away with a lot of things.
It is. God, I'm so ufologically jaded at this point. I love UFOs. Trust me, I love the UFO, but modern ufology is a big letdown.
I saw a picture of Lou Elizondo and Jeremy Corbell in like a arm wrestling pose the other day, and I was like,
I did too.
I can smell this fucking photo.
Yeah. Also, that you know, like that photo, it perfectly like distills down what it kind of is mainstream wise. There's great research, great books, still great cases happening, but in terms of the mainstream, it has been taken over by kind of this bro ufology thing, which you know, right on, good for them. It's just not for me.
Ufology with that same kind of, I don't know. I think there's like a lot of odd, creepy, and parapolitical things that are just a little bit too like, I don't want to go near that. I want space pancakes. I want elves invading a Kentucky farm. I want
Thank you.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think you've said it before in the show that like UFO stuff should be fun. It shouldn't be this like, I don't know. I think that the military stuff has been so overbearing for so many years and is such clear bullshit that like, I don't know. I think people still don't fully reckon with, and I know you've brought this up too, the like 1989 MUFON, like Bill Moore's speech.
I mean, listen to it.
Yeah. Where it's like, oh yeah, I was fed information that was and I helped drive Paul Benowitz crazy.
Yep.
But it's because I thought I would get more access to the truth. And
right. And so that's still going on. I am convinced.
Oh yeah. Like that. I feel like that's all the military stuff is right now, is just this kind of like, dodge for, what was really happening at Area 51, which is the stealth bomber, which is probably some of these drones we're seeing now.
That's exactly right. Well, they were, I think we know now with Annie Jacobson's book that they were testing drones during that era that John Lear and Bob Lazar were going to look at it. And like, I don't know. All I can say is that when it comes to disclosure, I think the big thing to disclose is that they have no fucking clue what this stuff is either.
Yeah. I don't think they're going to disclose their own secrets anytime soon.
No.
It's going to be some like legitimate leak from somewhere. The sort of thing that's out of left field, if there is anything that.
Yep. I want it to come from Joe Symington, not Lou Elizondo.
But, yeah, exactly.
Right. Like, well, speaking of, okay, so like I thought we kind of grab bag some Fortean stories from Nebraska, but while I think we've teed up UFOs about as good as one could possibly do. So I think we should start off with the Herb Shermer story, because it is without a doubt, I think, the most famous contactee story in Nebraska's history.
Yeah. I can't think of a lot of other like. Well, I can think of one other contactee story, and I can't remember the guy's name, but he was also full of shit.
John Foster?
Reinhold
Schmidt.
I think Ronald Schmidt. Yeah, like Carney.
We're gonna talk about him.
Same era as the Venusians.
It was a Venusian situation for him.
Yeah, but no, Herb Shermer is still like so fascinating as a story.
Do you want to kind of tee it up, and then we'll just kind of like bounce back and forth this one?
Yeah. Actually, because I was just I'm putting together like a zine of my art that is based on a lot of these cases.
Hell yeah.
So I was reading about Shermer this week from the old Scott Rogo book that's about like alien abductions, as they were almost just before the Bud Hopkins era, which is another like weird officialization of kind of a shittier narrative of these sorts of things.
Yeah, I've had to rethink a lot of those Bud Hopkins books, man.
Oh god, I read Intruders, and all I could think the whole time was like, I'm an artist. Do you want to come to my studio and get hypnotized and talk about aliens touching your junk?
And let me like put ideas in your head. Yeah, no, it's that's the thing with a lot of this stuff, is that I was very into Bud Hopkins when I was a kid. I loved his books. I'll be honest, like I loved them, and now I'm like, I think they're all like, Anyways, back to Herb Shermer.
Okay, so it's 1967 in Ashland, Nebraska. Incidentally, exit 420 on the interstate now.
Hell yeah!
We always laughed at where it was like Ashland one way and like Greenberg the other way on the exits, where it was like you can't get more like on the nose with.
Right. And Ashland, just for the listeners, is just give you like a sense of where it is. It is in the eastern side of Nebraska. It is about 22 minutes away from where I live. Very close.
Yeah.
Ashland's like almost Omaha.
Point between Omaha and Lincoln.
Yeah.
So yeah, he was a he was a local trooper. He was a local trooper that was just kind of out on patrol, and he saw a UFO, made a note of it in his records, and the next day was was feeling kind of under the weather and all these things, and kind of as he's putting his logs together realizes there's some missing time, and as time goes on he's trying to piece together what happened. Eventually he undergoes hypnosis from a few different hypnotists.
Leo Sprinkle being one of them.
Yeah. Well, and he was supposed to talk to the Condon committee, and the Condon committee lied to him and said
yes,
Dr. Condon was there, and he's like, no, that's not him. You just called him a different name.
Right.
Which is what I was reading about in that Rogo book. I can't remember who wrote the article, and I don't have it in my books in this room. I know exactly where.
If you don't mind, I would actually like to just describe, and I'm happy to help, the actual event.
Oh yeah, that's what I was getting to.
Sorry. Yeah, please.
Undergoes. I ramble a little.
No.
So he undergoes hypnosis, and he starts to piece together. At first, his narrative was that he felt like he was being like telepathically communicated with.
Right, because when he was doing his rounds at night, he was checking up on a gas station, which is how I think it was at 2 a.m. too. He was working the night shift, and he thought he saw an overturned semi truck, and he was like, "Well, that's odd." And so he gets closer and he sees what looks like a football shaped UFO that has a rocket fire coming out of the bottom of it.
Yeah, one of the more unusual shapes of UFOs, and as he pieces it together and these hypnosis sessions, eventually he's realizing, that he believes he was on the UFO, meeting the occupants of it, and they had kind of an unusual appearance too, because it's before the Greys were a big part of the narrative, so they were more in line with these kind of human but not cases, where there's a lot of similarities in how he described them to the Joe Simonton case up in Wisconsin, which is where I live now, where it was
God, what year was Simonton?
Simonton was right around the same time.
Was it 66 or 50? I mean, if not the same year, I think it was
late 60s as well, or
right.
late 60s, right around the same time.
Totally.
And kind of people wearing strange garb, headpieces over them, kind of ambiguously ethnic. I think Simonton described them as space Italians, but Shermer thought they looked a little bit more like East Asian, of some stripe. So he's meeting these occupants, and they're kind of giving him the common messages of the time about why they're there, and they kept asking him are you the Watchman? We need to communicate this to the Watchman of this, and also using that kind of off-putting syntax a lot.
Yes, that stilted kind of Men in Black talk. Yeah,
Men in Black talk is exactly what I'm thinking. Especially because I just finished the Jenny Randall's book. The truth, it was okay.
Yeah.
But
I love Randall's work though. Great contributor.
Absolutely. I think that was my bad starting point there. So, but yeah, kind of the odd MIB syntax, and Shermer being taken aboard the craft, led aboard the craft. Like I said, initially he felt like he was just being telepathically communicated with, but then the story became that he believed he was actually taken aboard the craft in kind of a hypnotic state.
Right.
So he's bridging that gap between the contactees and the abductees. Hills were a few years previously, Betty and Barney Hill, but Shermer was certainly another early case when there weren't a whole lot of these cases. There was Vilas Boas in Brazil, and there were the Hills, and there were a few things also kind of around this time, we were just saying, was Simonton was around,
right?
It might have been the same year.
Right.
Which, Simonton was the case of the space pancakes for listeners who, another man who said he met some occupants, and was gifted space pancakes. Herb Shermer got nothing of the sort. He just got nightmares and a neck welt.
Right. And didn't the UFO not who approached his car initially, didn't he have a wand?
Yeah, which was also a very common part of these narratives, was usually, and you still see that crop up, where there's some kind of wand or device that's implied to be very, very powerful, and in some people's stories even potentially destructive, like practically a phaser if you're a Star Trek
Right.
person.
Right. I mean, you can look at it in a sci-fi way, or you can also look at it in a fancy way where, like, are these like alien wizards we're dealing with here?
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking MIB, there's some people that connect that mythology more to like theosophy and that sort of thing than they do like an actual alien, which was the case of a lot of like contactees, where there's like this kind of odd bridge that I think a lot of the UFO community tried to push away from, where it was like connected to occultism in a strange way, but that like
Big time.
just to say the MIB, there's some people who think that Alfred Bender, who had an interest in all these things, this may have been something he conjured, like Tulpa style.
Well, he was messing with magic, though. You know, like Bender's story is way less sci-fi and fully occult.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, he was one of the first people to claim like an MIB encounter. But there's some people who've looked back on that and said like, this actually kind of sounds like his occult dabbling, tapped into something a little bit more on the Tulpa side of things, which is
absolutely
thought forms come to life.
Yep, exactly. And well, and but back to Shermer, like, so a lot of the interesting stuff, I feel like, happens in the aftermath of his story. So there's the contactee story that he has, missing time, really all the hallmarks of a classic abductee story. And like you said, it kind of is bridging the gap between the Space Brother era and the abduction era. It's kind of in that middle, like liminal zone between those.
It's sinister space cousin.
Right. But then, the thing with Shermer is him coming public with this, even telling his, the sheriff or the boss, I don't know what you call it, police chief, or I don't know, whatever. The guy is his boss at the police station. I'm not sure. I don't know if you call that a sheriff or whatever. But,
sergeant.
Sergeant. Yeah. Thank you.
His somebody, his boss.
His boss is the upper echelon. He really obviously, like, this ruined Herbert's life.
Well, and that was the thing with a lot of these, and a lot of the reason that, like, even if I don't know what any of this is, even if there's nothing physical there, like, a lot of these people are convinced something happened to them and have a lot to lose by coming forward with the story.
Yes.
Because, Shermer, who was also a veteran, like, he ended up kind of having to seclude from life because at one point, going back to Kasher, I was like, hey, is Herb Shermer still around? He's like, yeah, but he doesn't talk to anyone about this. He doesn't want anything to do with this.
No. Well, I mean, the thing, like, the town turned against him. So, listeners, just for an example, the head pastor of the church, I'm not sure. Again, I don't know. I'm terrible at titles. But the guy who ran, like, the big church in town called him a demon, said he interacted with, like, Satan, and that he should be, like, banished. Kids started hanging effigies of him on that bridge right by where this happened. So much so that, like, a few months later, Herbert Shermer quit the police force and moved out of Nebraska. I think he moved to Bellevue for a little bit, but then he ended up moving to Georgia. I think he, like, used a different name too for a while.
Yeah, I've heard kind of similar things. I know he went down south somewhere.
Yeah. His
workouts were Louisiana at one point.
Yeah. I mean, like, the town of Ashland was so unthinkably cruel to this man. And the ironic thing is, John, the year I moved back to Nebraska that summer, Ashland was having, like, Ashland Days. It's kind of their, like, weekend celebration of the town. And the theme was Herbert Shermer's UFO experience. And I was like, how dare you? Just kidding. But
I mean, that's kind of like during the 2017 eclipse, both McMinnville and Hopkinsville did, like, it was the 70th anniversary for both of those, but they did their, like, own UFO days around the eclipse. And those are also people that, there was a lot of mockery to this. Even Simon had kind of the same thing where he's like, I wish I had never said that. And this is something you told me, where both Simonton and Shermer would tell people later, like, that wasn't actually the only time this happened to me.
Yeah.
I just never wanted to bring up that it happened multiple times because of how, like, it ruined my life the first time around.
Right. And so one interesting thing I was able to glean, so I obviously went to the Ashland days, and it was during the COVID was raging, so it wasn't super well attended, like, for the lectures, but Herbert's surviving brothers, 2 brothers, actually came in from, like, one was from living in New Mexico, one was maybe somewhere in western Nebraska, but they came in for this lecture about Herbert Schirmer, and there was like 4 people there, which kind of sucked for them, but for me it was really great because after the lecture I was able to talk to both of them for about an hour, and what they told me is, interestingly enough, and this was never mentioned in any book that I could find, their entire family had a kind of a dramatic UFO sighting when they were all, he's like, I was 8, so Herbert would have been like 12, but they were in White Sands, New Mexico, because his father, he was working down there at the time, and they saw a silver saucer landed in a salt bed.
Yeah.
And so that never came out in the literature. And his brothers told me, they're like, well, this happened to him. He never changed his story. Like, like he became uber religious after this, and it definitely traumatized him for the rest of his life, even as an old man.
Yeah, I mean, in some of those interviews, like with him, even when he was trying to get this investigated by like the Condon Committee, which would have been the big like UFO investigative body.
Yeah, he was invited there.
Yeah, and he was having PTSD nightmares, more or less.
Yep.
That were really starting to bug him, which was part of like almost like, not necessarily in a religious sense, but almost wanting to like exercise this from himself, like get this out because it was causing problems at home.
Yep.
He was having nightmares. He was waking up having disturbed his wife in some fashions.
And he was like in his early 20s, and he was like this guy who, from everyone I've talked to, everyone loved him in town. He was like a war vet hero, a police officer, like a really well-respected, popular guy, and then the whole town turned on him.
Yeah, well, and if you search him now, you get a lot of the like military stuff, incidentally. So like you get a lot of the veteran record, and obviously the UFO stuff is still in there, but it's almost like the kind of like that comes back to what initially like garnered him the respect of this town, and like he wasn't considered anybody crazy, which made the story like so much weirder. Was that like this was kind of a mainstay of the town guy, out on patrol in one of those towns that's only going to have a couple officers, and the kind where you're gonna kind of know everybody, some very old school type of policing you don't have as much today.
Right. It's almost like he's like neighborhood watch more than a cop, that was the era, especially in a town like Ashland back then.
Yeah, break up the fight at the bar.
Right. And then have a beer with them.
Have them sleep it off in the jail.
That's exactly right. Oh, that sounds fun. I'd love to sleep it off in a jail one time. In a small town jail.
I no longer drink, but maybe I'll like act the part so I can sleep it off.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, oh no, don't breathalyze me. Man.
Right.
I was drinking squirt and grenadine all night. I just.
Well, I mean, to the listeners out there, and some of you probably obviously were familiar with the Herb Shermer story. I would say it is a fun one to read about. It's one that it's an important case, obviously to me and you, but like it is an important case in the whole contactee sub genre of ufology, I think. So it's one to read up on about it. I can't recommend it enough. I am in love with that case. I always will be.
Yeah. Well, and you could even look at it in like the Jacques Vallée sense, where it's like he was reporting something that was what was generally the kind of like the archetype at the time.
Right.
That was this like human but uncanny, this kind of strange.
Yeah.
Before there became something else that like it shifted to, which traditionally over time you see things align with what the current beliefs are.
Right.
But these like very ancient sets of behaviors.
Yeah. They're just slightly off. Like I always think of the example of like the Men in Black, think it was John Keel, I think referenced in a few books, but like of the Men in Black in the diner eating Jello with a fork.
Yeah.
Almost
or
human, but like a little off.
Figure out how to drink a glass of water that
Right.
offered, or showing up with like clear askew lipstick on.
Yeah, yes.
And like all these kinds of like very, very strange stories.
Yeah,
And that's what I found interesting about reading the Randall book, was her waffling between, and it's like, well, maybe these are military people acting weird, but some of those stories are just so weird that it's like feels rooted in something else, and it feels very trickery.
Yeah, me too. And it is very esoteric and occulty, and there's like ancient motifs in there that I just find so fascinating.
It lines up so much with like very traditional mythologies.
Yes.
Which is, the point of at least two Jacques Vallée books, both Passport to Magonia and the first of the
Dimensions, or no, Contact.
It's Dimensions.
Dimensions, yeah.
The second one. And the
Dimensions is one of the best books ever, I think.
Yeah,
I love that book.
I agree, because that's, I think, where he was first putting forth the control system theory,
which I love.
After going with like Passport to Magonia is rooting itself in the mythology and dabbling more in like, well, maybe this is like a fairy, maybe this is an elf thing. And I think Confrontations is like really sealing on what he was starting to see, that it's like some continuity of something that is here and has been here, and may be part of the earth itself in some strange way.
Yes. And I love that. Well, gosh, we're already at like, oh my gosh. I don't know. Let's do one more. But we're going to have to do other parts of this because there's so much here. But like, you're familiar with the John Foster the contactee John Foster, right?
Yeah. A little bit, but I couldn't pull anything out about it.
Well, yeah, I mean, like I have one of my favorite John. I have all of his. He has a trilogy of books that are absolutely wild. But like, he claims to have like over 1,000 abduction or contacts with UFOnauts. And it's quite amazing. I saw him when I was in 7th grade. I saw Dr. Jack Casher, invited him and like interviewed him and did a presentation. And I remember I was blown away. I first off, when I was 12 or 13, I believed everything he was saying 100%.
Oh, yeah. 12 or 13, that's like the perfect time to like stuff your brain full of nonsense and regurgitate it on a podcast.
Oh, dude, I believed all of it and I loved it. Yeah, I'd be like, talking to my parents, like, God, guys, why aren't you concerned about this? Like, but so John Foster was, he started having these, abductions or contacts in the late 50s. But I'm going to just kind of briefly tell you about one case because I think you'll find this hilarious. But he was at a Nebraska football game in the early 80s. And this is when the Huskers were really good at football. They were like one of the best teams in the nation. Husker football is, if you don't know, is very big in Nebraska. It's very important to people. It is. It's a religion, right? And he was at the game, and then he saw this black mist appear over the field, and the entire stadium froze. Everyone was like frozen in place except for him. And then he saw like a UFO land and like this little like alien buddies get out. Then the mist disappeared, and they went back on the ship, took off, and then the game resumed. It's like they like stopped time just for him at a Nebraska football game, 80,000 people.
Whitley Strieber of him. By way of Grand Island or something.
Right. I just thought that case is so fucking funny to me. Love it.
Well, I feel like any Nebraska case that gets anywhere is always weird. Mm-hmm. There's the Omaha airship in the in the 1890s, and there's the weird, probably hoax like Max Nebraska crash.
The Benkelman. Yeah, the Benkelman area just comes up again and again, because wasn't that one of the areas of like the cattle mutilations in like big time
in the 1970s? So like
that was like one of the places in the entire country that were receiving, I mean, like hundreds of mutilation cases.
Yeah, well, and like there were UFO reports there around like the late 60s, early 70s, just before the mutilation cases started.
Absolutely.
That's a weird area.
It definitely is. I've never even been out there. That's way west, right?
Yeah. That's sort of south and west of North Platte. So I've been there. I can't tell you much about it. I think it was a small town softball tournament my dad dragged me to.
Right. Well, the Binkelman case. Gosh, let's do a thumbnail of that really quick.
Yeah, thumbnail. The papers of the time, which a lot of times had habits of like inserting stories for entertainment, claimed that a craft came from the sky.
And this is the 1800s, FYI. This is like 1880s, maybe, I think.
Yeah, I believe this was 1884.
Yeah.
And this predated some Texas stories that kind of had similar things.
This is pre-Aurora.
Yeah. Claimed a craft crashed, that there were occupants, that they were buried there, and that some strange metals were retrieved. And so, yeah, but it also, like I said, it comes at a point where the local newspaper also had habits of like insert stories that were there more to entertain the audiences than be true necessarily. So there's more of like a folkloric campfire tale aspect to that.
It is. What is interesting to me is that this case sounds like if you were to take the year and put 1984 as opposed to 1884, you'd be like, okay, yeah, it sounds like a 1984 like part of the UFO mythology of the 80s. I mean, so it really predates. Like it was a mechanical machine that fell from the sky, and this is before the flying airship wave, really. I mean, not that there wasn't UFO stuff.
That was about 10 years off from starting.
Yeah, right. In Nebraska had a lot. I mean, in Nebraska was like at the epicenter of the Midwest was the whole. But the Spiegelman thing is so interesting. One, I will say, they tried to go out 2 days later after to look at the wreckage, like some outside police force, like from like a bigger town. And then the rain supposedly melted all the metal into like a goo.
Yeah. I forgotten about that aspect of it.
Yeah, I love it.
That one is one of those like essential to the folklore of the whole thing.
It is.
So yeah, that one's fascinating. And then you get the airship in Omaha in 1897. That's all
right. Which is an interesting case because 600 witnesses. I mean.
Yeah, well, and those stories also have the similar, like, oddly behaving occupants that are kind of talking in...
Like weird new German,
Yeah, and like strange affect, strange way they're phrasing things that's right along the lines of the, like, MIB stuff we were just kind of talking about. Or Shermer, the, like, are you the Watchman?
Right.
Watchman, we have a message.
Right. Well, especially in the airship wave, there were so many cases. Zelia Edgar did an amazing 3-part series on our YouTube channel, deep diving some of the contactee aspects of the airship wave. And so many times it was these people who like looked human, but kind of off. And they were always having people go into town and run errands for them.
Yeah.
That was in same with Simonton, go get water. And you hear this over and over again. And it was always like water, some supplies like meat. And then they would say weird things like, do you know what time it is? And the person would be like, it's noon. And they go, no, it's not. It's 4 p.m. See you later. I have to go to Cuba.
Yeah. They're always in unusual garb. But, like Simonton, that era, there were other stories of like being asked to retrieve water. There was a woman, Maria Rosa Sintra in Brazil that she was working at a tuberculosis hospital. She heard something. She thought it was a new patient. This woman in unusual garb was at the door, handed her, very similar to Simon, like a vessel to put water in. I believe she made, or no, it was Simon's aliens made the drinking motion, but with Sintra, this woman made it clear that she wanted water. So Sintra filled it up and then filled up a mug and then like walked the woman out. And that's when Sintra saw like this UFO in the distance and watched the woman be helped up by an occupant. And then the thing went up and she, was kind of left terrified. But she was also a victim of mockery after this that is part of the like, okay, something is happening here. Maybe it's physical, maybe it's psychological. I think these things are worthy of investigation just to figure out like if this is in people's brains, what's happening in their brains. That you also have weird things happening with vegetation. So maybe it's even like keep mycologist out here.
Yeah, no, I mean for real. Because I mean, like, it's so weird because this stuff seems like it's almost like an immaterial situation, but then can present itself as material, and
Yeah,
like
yeah.
you know, like it's very odd.
Yeah, and that's why there's some of the things that intrigue me about when people talk about it in references to like fungal things, which goes back to like the Fey folk and the elves, where it's like, well, yeah, that would leave weird marks in the ground if this was some kind of like underground fungus, and these experiences can be very, very similar to what people report on like psychedelics.
Right?
Like,
No,
oh yeah,
exactly.
I once had a friend tell me they talk to the trees in
Yeah.
the redwoods in California.
Yeah.
Where it's like, okay, well, there's so what's happening? So it's like, well, something's happening here. These people are putting themselves on the line to say something, and they're not going to get rich off of this. And
That's exactly right. I always kind of go back to the thing where it's like, if all this stuff, you know, Bigfoot, ghosts, UFOs, all of it, if it's none of it is genuine in the way we think about it, well, it's still just as interesting to me, because then what is the deal with the mass hallucination people have been having for thousands of years?
yeah,
Like,
yeah,
you know?
yeah. What part of our brain is like conjuring the same vision over and
Yes.
over and over? Why do we have disparate people in disparate places reporting very similar strange encounters?
Right. Right. Ah, I couldn't agree more. Well, hey, John, I'm going to add, if you wouldn't mind, I am going to run to the bathroom for like 38 seconds.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell the listeners this is your time? You know, say whatever you want. You could describe your dinner tonight, your lunch. I'll be back in 38 seconds. The floor is yours.
Well, since he wants me to describe my dinner, I hate to admit that my wife and I went to Taco Bell before this, which is our usual Wednesday. Like, we've given up on the possibility of like making dinner tonight. We're like, oh, we're tired from the week. So we went to Taco Bell, but don't tell Steve yet. We'll have him hear this when he goes back over the episode. But yeah, I think one of the other things I'd say is that it's interesting from somebody who wrote about space to just go back in the archives of science journals for strange things. There was William Corliss has a series of books that people should seek out, where it's these anomalies within science journals.
Oh, I can't wait to discover what you said.
Oh, I was talking about William Corliss. Do you know this name?
No.
William Corliss is a guy, he was an engineer, and he started combing through science journals for like strange things.
I love it.
And so, you know, he was hoping for that having some like more legitimacy to it than kind of anecdotes or like something that, you know, would be perceived at a higher level than Charles Fort. No offense to Saint Fort.
Right. Saint Fort.
But yeah, so there's these series of books Corliss came out with that are just these little like brief anecdotes of things that like a report of a moon of one of the planets that was never seen again, which is the case where there's been like, you know, and it's probably like a misseeing, but he just wanted to, it was almost like this obsessive collecting and scrapbooking of these things. And that's as somebody who's very interested in, I love going into ADSABs, which is like an astronomical database run by Harvard, because they're, you know, I think parallel with kind of the UFO world, but they did not like to cross over.
Mm-hmm.
There were scientists that were trying to look for things shockingly similar to UFOs, and this was before Avi Loeb. We don't have to get into too much on the Oumuamua thing, but like they were like, well, what would this look like? Well, it would look like this, and then they'd think they found something, and get excited, and then be just as excited to be like, well, this is actually like an oddly behaving near Earth comet. So this is fascinating in its own right. But yeah, there's, you know, and just a few years ago, there were people who were like, well, if we were like, if there were odd things in the sky before Sputnik, that might indicate like a Bracewell probe or something going by, where you would have lights that are not there night to night on old astronomical plates, and they found a few cases of that. So, I think the SETI stuff can be just as fascinating, but it's almost like the sort of things that Corliss died a few years ago, or like maybe a decade back or something. But that would end up in the I've called it the Corleana, to go along with the Forteana, where it's like, well, here's something weird. And one of my favorite things from when I was a science writer was somebody discovered mammoth skeletons that had injuries in the skull that could be interpreted to be these mammoths beaten with like stone tools.
Whoa.
It was 125,000 years ago. There were no Homo sapiens on this continent that we know of. So it's like, well, what's happening here? It could just be an accident. It could be stone tools. If it is stone tools, humans weren't the only humans. Homo sapiens weren't the only human species at that time. So it's like, well, did like a Homo erectus come here on some kind of raft? Were there like migrations that didn't end in settlements?
Interesting.
So I love those sorts of things too, where it's like, here's this kind of standout study, and people are going to debate it back and forth, or like the phosphine on Venus, where there's a gas in the Venus atmosphere that on Earth is only created by bacteria. There's some back and forth about whether it was actually detected, but recent studies have shown people have actually found this gas again.
Whoa.
Yeah. So there's all these like random strange things that come up, or the like Gaia data that, it's like, we found 7 stars that could have some kind of like mega structure there. That like scratches the same part of my brain as a UFO thing, but
totally
academically backed.
Yeah.
But they have to come to those from their own avenues. They're not gonna. They're gonna. Herb Shermer is not going to be mentioned in Nature.
No. Unfortunately, one day.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, I would like to move on for UFOs. They'll be mentioned tangentially, but I would like to talk about a mutual obsession that we both have. And you actually sent me some interviews with people who knew him, but that man is legend Danny Liska. Why don't you tell us a little bit about Danny Liska?
Danny Liska is mostly known today as a guy who took a lot of motorcycle adventures. He took a motorcycle adventure across the entire Americas.
Wasn't he the first one to do it? He's in the game, isn't he? Yeah.
So basically, like Yukon down to like Chile, and I believe he did some kind of like through Europe to Africa trip as well. So like a lot of people know him as a motorcycle guy, but he had a keen interest in the paranormal, and he loved collecting various legends. So
this is like we're talking early 60s kind of was his heyday, right?
I think he died sometime in like the 80s or 90s. So this was like 60s and 70s. He was coming out with some books, some of which were about his like motorcycle journeys, but other of which, he's from Niobrara, which is like northeast Nebraska,
beautiful,
right by the South Dakota border.
Mm-hmm.
My friends and I went up there to like do these interviews. We actually like for fun walked across the South Dakota and Nebraska border because it's right there. But yeah, so some of his books were actually collecting local legends, and some of his friends were telling me like, well, Danny would kind of believe anything. If somebody said they saw a giant rat, he wanted to make sure it got like included in the book. Or like, I think one of them might have like human-sized beaver or something.
Right.
So he loved anything like that, anything that was like native folklore as well, that he would collect in these books, one of which is the Ponca Curse. I'm not recalling the other one off the bat. But those books are kind of strange because it's not just about that. It's kind of like everything that's happening in the region.
Mm-hmm.
But also on his travels, he eventually like married a kind of, a lot of people referred to her as like a witch.
Right.
From somewhere in South America. And The backstory here is in 2006 when I was still working for the paper and had come across this guy, I think through Dale Bacon, who was also
legend. He
very,
was
very involved in that Fortean Society.
He was one of the three who ran the Fortean Research Society.
Yeah, and he was also like a folklorist with the Nebraska Historical Society.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I had like watched a talk of his or something, and he had brought up Liska. And so I went up to Niobrara with some colleague friends. You know, when you're in college, those kind of blend together.
Yeah.
Everybody working late night at a newspaper and also being like 20. That's your social outlet now.
Yeah.
But we went up there and I investigated, or, you know, I talked to people he knew at the time. One of whom I believe was like a cop in town, another person that was just one of his friends from back when, and his ex-wife. And the weirdest thing out of the interview, and I didn't catch it, and my buddy did when they were talking, was talking in kind of the Wade Davis sense that she saw zombies, which is to say like a drugged human put in a like almost permanent trance-like state that is highly suggestible. But that was the kind of things that were like causing her distance from Danny, but the kind of witch wife feeling that when you're suddenly getting a divorce for somebody you met on your travels who is some kind of practitioner of folk religions that's really creeping people out. But yeah, that was probably the most interesting thing from there. But you know, at this point, I think those interviews I have, which I was lucky enough to realize my buddy might have in his archives, those people have probably since passed on, and you know, those tapes are probably one of the few extended accounts of kind of this story and like piecing
they're amazing.
Danny Liska from people who knew him.
Yeah, I mean, like honestly, like I didn't know about Danny Liska until probably 2020, and I freaked out. First, I tried to order. At the time, the books were like hundreds and hundreds of dollars, and I couldn't afford it. But I called some people from the Historical Society, and they didn't know a whole lot more. And honestly, I'm not even joking. The interviews you showed me, because you had found them and sent them to me, they were the most enlightening piece of information I had ever. I mean, like, and Danny Liska is actually a big deal still to this day in the motorcycle community. One thing that one of the historians in Omaha told me that, like, I guess there's hundreds of people every year after Sturgis go straight to the Niobrara to go like pay homage to him.
I would 100% believe it, because that's how he's known today. It's not necessarily for his interest in.
He's like a folk hero,
folklore and cryptids, which I would say that his interest was a lot of like cryptid.
Yeah, what was it? Tell the listeners what the name of his ranch was.
Oh, it was Bigfoot Ranch, wasn't it?
Yes, it was Bigfoot Ranch. And this is way before Bigfoot was like kind of new to the mainstream at this point.
Yeah. It was that sort of thing that's just like coming up, because that would have been like the 50s or 60s. But yeah, Bigfoot Ranch. He loved stories of like giant serpents being seen near the Niobrara River, which is, you know, given that town its name.
Right.
And that sort of thing. So yeah, he was collecting stories of mostly cryptids at a time where that might not have been even the name associated with that. It was just these kind of like strange accounts of strange animals and
monster stories, basically.
Monster stories, wolfmen and Sasquatches. And...
Well, you know, I remember on the original cover of one of his books, not the Ponca Curse. I can't remember the name of it. What you say?
Like too.
Yeah, but on the cover of it is a white Bigfoot.
Yeah.
I mean, like, you know.
And there's one, if people are interested, I think it's like the site is like dannyliska.us, but you can reach out to this woman who is still selling the books, and they're not hundreds of dollars.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was reading them at the Nebraska Historical Society and like the Lincoln Downtown Library when I was like throwing myself into this. And I think he is, you know, people still know the name because people still know the motorcycle stuff, but I don't think people know his contribution to the weird quite as much, but it was something he was obsessed with.
Right, right. I mean, he was almost like a kind of like a, rural biker version of John Fort, but just, covering Nebraska
Yeah,
weird
yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
But he was obsessed. I mean, he's such an interesting figure that obviously not known in the paranormal community, but in the biker community, he's like a folk hero.
Well, and some of what he collected, because there are like native communities up there, are like native stories that may not be told elsewhere. Now, the what he was putting to page versus what the actual legends were, there might have been some difference. Because if you read those books, they're pretty loose.
Yeah.
But as collections of stories, those are stories that don't get brought up elsewhere. These are things that he was sourcing from his travels or from people he grew up around.
And the Ponca tribe,
experiences, the Ponca tribe. Yeah, he's fascinating, and I really hope people seek him out more.
Yeah.
He produced a documentary at the time. It's long since gone. It got eaten with web migrations. YouTube wouldn't let you upload anything more than 5 minutes, and it was like 15 minutes long or something.
That's so tragic. I would love to see that.
Yeah, my article's still out there, but like the actual, I really wish that video still existed.
Yeah. Oh man.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like while we're on the topic of kind of like Nebraska legends, we should talk about Reinhold Schmidt, because Reinhold Schmidt actually, if you're a contactee buff, you'll recognize that name. But he is. Do you know the story pretty well?
I don't know it super well.
Well,
I know he was full of shit.
Yeah, well, he was. Yeah, he was a total con man. But like that's part and parcel of all this stuff, right? But he was even prior to his UFO sighting a convicted embezzler and fraudster. But the quick story is, so in a rural area outside of Kearney, Reinhold Schmidt claimed to have seen a giant blimp with propellers on each end and 4 men and women who escorted him inside the ship and spoke a language that, to him, quoting, sounded like New German. Which I don't know what does New German sound like.
Yeah.
Kind of like, I mean, a lot of this is sort of similar to Schirmer's. The experience lasted 30 minutes. He made a big splash in the lecture circuit. He was one of the most sought after people at UFO conferences for a few years.
Yeah, well, and he was kind of riding the Adamski wave, right?
Oh yeah, I mean, he's totally lifting. He said they were from Venus. I mean, he was completely, putting a Nebraska spin on a California story, really.
Yeah.
But he even actually took he was trying to get like proof that same day. He took the cops out to the site, right? And all they found was this like kind of like purplish, greasy, substance, and then they found a can of motor oil in the back of his car.
Yeah.
And so because he was a convicted felon, they actually took him to the psychiatric center and committed him.
That actually makes him something we have a lot today with all the military UFO stuff, an early con man in the UFO scene.
Well, and I mean, like, just to kind of like, so, after he got out of, or like the psychiatric center, he's like, I'm going to ride this UFO. Continued for years to be like a top billing person at UFO conferences, moved to Bakersfield, California, and then started this big fancy grift of these like, like these an extraterrestrial crystal mining operation that he was doing to make contact, and he like stole like tons of money from old ladies, and so then he was put in jail. But at his court hearing, they actually brought in Carl Sagan to testify, saying,
"Really,
yes." Which I actually, when I was reviewing the case last night, I found this and it said Carl Sagan was there to testify that Saturn could not support life. I was like, oh, how amazing that Sagan got called in for this. I bet he probably loved it. He's like, yeah, let me go.
Yeah, relished in it. Although Sagan I love because he was so imaginative that he would come up with like, well, if Jupiter were to ever have life, it would have to be this, and like his floaters and sinkers and that sort of thing. And I love that he was like playing with these ideas of like, we should seek out life as we don't know it.
Yes.
Which is something that's still, science-wise very important today, because there's places like Titan that could be habitable.
Mm-hmm.
but you might be finding things that use like vinyl cyanide as like cell walls and that sort of thing. And that's another like, strange science paper but it's still by people that are taken seriously enough that when I help somebody write their book, it's like, oh yeah, okay, we will put this in when you've shown me the like list of co-authors here. I actually like trust this enough to have it in there.
Right. So John, is there any like you wrote a lot about these weird topics? What are some of your favorite stories? And I don't want to like just that means something to you because like you did tell me like a handful of cases and stories I had never heard of.
Yeah. I mean, like, I always love local ghost stories, so I kind of love the people who have repeatedly had theater ghosts at Temple Theater in Lincoln. I loved finding people who had done those or who had those sorts of encounters. I love the Shermer case. I love that there's been a couple like Nebraska like winged weirdies.
Well,
that was very like cross between Mothman and Spring-Heeled Jack.
It's one of my favorite cases of all time. Do you want to tell it?
I it's not very fresh to me, but it's essentially that there was this kind of like winged menace in the skies that was acting very like threateningly towards the local people of Fall City, which is in that weird zone of like,
it's in Richardson County. Dude, it's crazy.
Yeah. That whole area
it's messed up.
It's on something.
Well, yeah, I mean, let's finish talking about that, and then while we're talking about that region, I want to talk about the true crime of that region. But yes, so well, you're so right, and I think I've probably talked about this case because it is literally my favorite high strange case of Nebraska history. So this creature was like a 9 foot long. It looked like had like tan brown rubbery skin, looked demonic, crystal blue eyes, and it had like a wing contraption. Like it was wearing a harness with a little computer on its chest.
Yeah, which makes it very similar to like what was that, 60s? Like a 1960s.
This case was 57, I believe.
Yeah. But yeah, like almost like the Spring-Heeled Jack mythos, which was somebody just before like the in London before Jack the Ripper era that kind of wore a baddish costume and was reported to be able to leap very well.
Yeah.
And would just the entire motive was scare the shit out of people.
Yeah.
And that was kind of, it's like, that's why I say it's like half Spring-Heeled Jack, half a little bit almost like a Mothman type of thing. Although there's a couple like other Mothman cases in Nebraska that are kind of like a passage on a website, and it's like, I need to know what book this is in. I need to know who has a diary page about this.
Right. Well, do you have any other winged weirdie cases, flying winged humanoid cases that you like in Nebraska?
I mean, those are the kind of the ones I can think of where it's like the Mothman anecdotes where I just like need to know more because it's like tripod.com.
Yeah.
Or like, so many paranormal books are the things like the Mysteries of the Unknown Reader's Digest book where you get a paragraph.
Yeah.
You get not much else to go on.
That's the problem with Keel too, where like he doesn't really cite any sources, so you can't do any follow-up.
And Keel was sometimes his own source.
I think so. He was a craftsman of the story, like
which that's something I at least like about Vallée, who is writing a little bit more of like a professionalized.
I think so. Yeah.
You look in the back and like I found that Sintra story because of a single paragraph thing in the back of Passport to Magonia. And I was like, I need to know more, and I don't know more. And here's this random article online, and then finally, I'm like, looked at it again, and it's like, FSR, Flying Saucer Review.
Yep. No, yeah. I mean, that's the. I mean, I love John Keel, but like, it is one of the things where I'm like, I'm not sure he believed a lot of these things. Like it's funny. Indrid Cold's like made such a big comeback, and even Keel, like there's a lecture on YouTube at like a 40 conference, and he's like, yeah, of all the things in the Mothman prophecies, Woodrow Derenberger is the sketchiest to me. Like he was not a believer in the Ender Cole thing.
You had Tanner Boyle on the show, and didn't you do a bunch of installments about like why Woody Daringberg?
Well, it's about the whole saga. I mean, it is. I can't. First off, like I love Tanner so much. His oh my god, now I'm drawing a blank. Oh no, what's it? Getting Spooked. Getting Spooked.
Yeah.
It's the best Substack I am a member of. His articles are so good.
Yeah,
but his articles
and he I mean, it was a guest post, but like covered Belita Adair, which is this like freaky thing from that goes from Fate magazine to like making satanic black metal.
Right, dude. Well, he's unique because he takes Fortiana and puts a parapolitical spin on it.
Yeah.
It really has bared a lot of fruit. Like, he's doing some of the most interesting research in the world to me right now.
Yeah, and it's the seriously not literally thing where he's still structuring what the story is, but what might be behind the story. And some of these early abductions, what might be behind the story is actually things connected to parapolitics. Where it's like,
for sure.
CIA, because there's even people that think like the hills were either an attempt to like implant memories, or kind of like you see in Jose Chung's From Outer Space, the episode of the X-Files,
the best one,
the military staging abductions that people, and so it's just these like rabbit holes where that's like an important component. It's like what could have been happening to these people is like MK Ultra psyops.
I think that, I mean, not to be fully paranoid, but like I'm convinced that I mean, the Villa Zabos case has CIA written all over it. I mean, like, you know, and even Valet now is like, kind of think this was a CIA op, you know,
if it's Villas Boas, at least he got laid out of it.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Oh god. Well, so we were talking about Richardson County, right, where the winged weirdie took place, and there's definitely other. So
there's Bigfoot down there.
There's Bigfoot down there. There's UFO. So like, really, as far as I know, John, you may disagree, but like the eastern portion of Nebraska, basically from the tippy top up by the Niobrara area, all the way down to Fall City, because that's basically like southernmost tip of Nebraska.
Yeah, you're getting into like basically Missouri territory.
That's exactly right. Like, so everything along the Missouri River on the east side of Nebraska, that to me is where like the biggest confluence of Fortiana historically is.
I agree, because the more north you get there, you're gonna hit Niobrara too, where that's like, northeast to the point of practically like just north of Lincoln. I don't have a map in front of me.
Right.
I apologize to the 300 people if I have like mischaracterized your town.
Yeah,
I know you're east of Valentine, so not much. But
right. Well,
that's like the corridor of the weird if you're going at least outside of like Bankelman.
That's exactly right. And so where Fall City, the winged weirdie, my favorite case of all time, took place is a county called Richardson County. And John, I don't know if you're aware of this, but I've gotten into the history of true crime in Nebraska simply because where I find the most weird cases of the Fortiana, well, my God, this is where a lot of the true crime happens. For instance, I'll save the biggest one for last, but like, and I'm not trying to sound excited because these are all horrific events. My God,
I don't think your listeners can see me cringing every.
Yeah, it's hard to. I'm not gonna go into details.
Into myself.
People can look it up, and maybe one time I know somebody who's a specialist in Nebraska true crime. Maybe we'll do a true crime episode down the road. But so in Richardson County, just alone, I'll name the three of the biggest ones. In Fairfield, Nebraska, which is right in Richardson County, right by Fall City, is currently to this day the biggest Nazi propagandist in the entire country.
Yeah. I've read. You read the statistic that like, the Lincoln area has the most like white supremacist propaganda anywhere. It's one guy. It is not like
one guy.
League of Skinheads. It is one guy who just cranks it out.
Yep.
All this hate, and
he is the biggest publisher of like Nazi propaganda. Literally, like before he came back to Nebraska, he was in jail for Germany for Nazi propaganda.
Yeah.
And the Guardian's written articles about him. Like foreign newspapers have written articles about him. New York Times did a piece on him. But this guy is a total piece of shit, like psychopath, and the whole town hates him. They've tried to get him out. The town band together, hired a lawyer, so like, we want to get him out of here, but he does everything right up against before the law. You're breaking the law, so they can't technically kick him out.
Yeah, no, I like that's that. I mean, like, and that's, you know, it's eventually going to lead us to like some of the like white supremacist militia shit that's happening in that region with like Posse Comitatus in the 80s and all.
That's exactly right. Yeah. Well, that leads us right to the Rulo Yahweh cult, which, like you said, was actually like a peel-off group from the Posse Comitatus, which I'm sure some people know about. That's kind of like early right-wing fascist militia people. It got
very popular after the farm crisis.
Yep.
Which was starting to radicalize some of the farmers against the government because they were watching the failure of their farms, and the Posse Comitatus ideas became very popular, where it was like there's no rule above, there should be no government above the sheriff level. Like the county government is where you should draw the line.
Yeah.
And it like kind of leads eventually into like sovereign citizen movement.
Yeah.
Stuff. Yeah.
Early Bill Cooper stuff.
yeah. But the Yahweh cult was certainly also like this kind of creepier, apocalyptic offshoot of that if you read Evil Harvest, it'll just stick with you for years.
It will. It's such a. The thing is, it's a really great. It's an unbelievable like history of the early militia movement. So it's like it's kind of an important book. Like I mean, like, but it is. You can skip the really graphic section. I actually like wasn't able to get through some of the parts.
I was, but it's still. I haven't read that book in 20 years, and it's still stuck with me.
Yeah.
Because Michael Ryan had killed a couple of his cult members very disturbingly, and like a lot of people, he was one of those guys that was like, I was special forces, I did all these things that like has the kind of like.
Well, he also said he was a CIA asset.
Yeah. Which you.
I don't believe that. He was a psycho.
Didn't Cooper say that too? That he was a Fed and eventually all these things, even though he's eventually killed by the Feds.
Yeah.
But like he was almost a prototype for a lot of those Christian identity.
Yeah. The Great War is coming. Yeah.
Very apocalyptic. Very. We are going to ride out this collapse of government. We are going to do all these things, and we will inherit this. But he becomes gradually more messianic. Which is how it got the like Yahweh cult name, where it's like going from militia to like this personality cult, where he is like biblical end times, the Christian identity, which is like a white supremacist Christian movement. But like Michael Ryan is both like a fascinating and horrifying case from that area that's also kind of emblematic of how weird it gets down there.
It gets really weird, and like I folks, like this is, I mean, like, and I don't know this for certain, but this has to be one of the most unpopulated. I think I looked it up. I think there's like 8,500 people living in that county. So it is like, I mean, arguably one of the smallest counties in the United States. It is teeny tiny. Like the population is so low. Yet all these, I mean, there's been so many things. Like we could do a whole show on the Yahweh cult, but like, we'll just move on. I think, but like we
can also leave that up to like last podcast.
That's exactly right. Yeah, maybe we'll do that as like a part 4 when we really want to horrify people. But it is so messed up. But also, I will say, so interesting. It's a good if you want to understand how these groups have proliferated and almost kind of understand. I mean, it's a lot when you read that book and you kind of understand the early militia movement of the early 80s, and then you look into what's happening in 2025, you're like, oh, I kind of see how we got here.
Yeah, it was so pivotal in me being able to understand like the growth of like the white supremacy movement that is outside of neo-Nazism.
Right.
And see like how these people were radicalized, but also how you get things that aren't necessarily seen as like white nationalist, white supremacists now, like the sovereign citizen movement.
Yeah.
Where it's like coming out of these same ways you're talking about, like the rule of the government and fiat currency and these like, who has the authority in these matters? We should not be handing the authority to people who are, who we've never consented to this with.
Right. Oh, Lord have mercy. I'll tell you. And then kind of just for rule of threes, I'll mention another true crime, awful event that happened in Richardson County is the the famous movie that won Hilary Swank the Oscar, Boys Don't Cry.
Yeah. It's just
that story happened, which is horrifying.
Yeah, well, and you can see that you can view that through the lens of like this huge anti-trans movement now, that this was this thing that was like very shocking. The Brandon Tina murder was very shocking to people at the time, in the same way as that was around the same time as Matthew Shepard. And it's also like how we haven't come far enough from that in really unfortunate ways. I do have a true crime story, if you'd like. That is,
I'd love to hear it.
Oh, it's so much lighter.
Good.
And like essential family lore that I didn't believe it when my dad told me, and then I found like the paper trail for it. So, do you know the town of Hallam, Nebraska? It's in Lancaster County.
Where is that? Where's Lancaster County? That's Lincoln. Yeah.
Like it was wiped off the map more or less in the big tornadoes in like 2004.
Oh God.
But it's kind of where my family like emigrated to in like the late 1890s. And my great grandfather was the town marshal, but it's a town small enough where he was also the mortician, the gas station owner, owned an electronics store, that sort of thing. But he's the town marshal, and not much is happening there. Kind of like Shermer, where it's like not much really happens in this small town, so the job is usually pretty sleepy. Except an inmate named Shorty Gray escaped from the penitentiary. Very violent criminal, kind of a bank robber, but not much regard for human life. And the kind of search party for him realizes that, they have him kind of cornered in this barn. So my great grandfather and another part of this search party, I believe another officer, like go into the barn to try to get Gray. And, he has the gun pointed right at my great grandfather. And the guy he's with just reflexively, without thinking, jams his thumb and index finger right behind the hammer of the gun. And that's the only reason my great grandfather survived, was this guy, without thinking, just jamming right there to make sure the gun couldn't fire. And they were able to arrest and re-imprison Gray, who eventually escaped again and was killed. But yeah, like the only reason I'm here is because of that guy.
That guy, I mean,
yeah, without thinking, just jamming his finger right behind the hammer. Probably hurt himself in the process, but like
the reflexes too. That's like deep ninja stuff.
Yeah, and like I said, my dad told this story, and that seems like the sort of thing where you're like uncles or whoever, because like some of the reason I'm into these things is like having family members tell scary stories to me.
Sure.
Insisting on it. But yeah, that seems like the kind of family legend that's like, sure, Dad, this is a great story. And then I found it in newspapers, and that sort of thing. That's the exact story of like jammed his finger behind the hammer, and that saved Marshall Wenz.
Wow, that's amazing.
His name wasn't Marshall; he was the town marshal.
Right.
His name instantly was also John Wenz. So,
oh my God! Wow, that is such a wild story.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of those that when I was able to verify it was one of those kind of blew my mind.
Yeah, because I could see that could be just like, almost considered like, oh, this is just family folklore,
Yeah. And it's not quite to Richardson County, but it's still southeast Nebraska. True crime, and it's pulling us away from brutal murders.
Yeah, well, good, thank you. And that whole area is a weird area too. Down by Palmyra, there's a lot of Bigfoot action currently in the last couple of years. But
and in York, which isn't that far from Lincoln, had the like famous like 70s Bigfoot sightings that
Yes.
I don't know as much about it as you, but that had a lot of like investigations to it, and was
Yeah.
actually reported somewhat in the media, which
Right.
wasn't always
Right.
the case with like Bigfoot sightings.
Yeah, my favorite story from there is, and this is kind of weird. So I actually called the town so this guy wrote a famous, one of the guy who reported it, who was for the York newspaper. He now works for the tourism department of York, which I'm sure is a lot of tourism.
Yeah.
I'm
I
sure
mean, they have that hot air balloon water.
that's
tower.
exactly right, which I always thought was like a fake out Worlds of Fun thing. But he told me, I actually had a great conversation with him. He told me a bunch of Bigfoot stories that he was reporting on. And he was like, I don't know what to think. He's like, I didn't believe it. I thought it was kind of this hysteria thing that was going on in town until my best childhood friend, who I had known since I was 8 years old. We're still friends to this day. My wife and her and her husband like traveled together. They're best friends. They've literally been best friends since they're 8 years old, and now they're like 70, right? It's really cute. But when she was like 16 years old, she was driving on a country road outside of New York, and in the ditch, she sees what looks like, a Bigfoot, she described like a 7 foot tall gorilla, and she like kind of hugged the other side of the road, drove past it, and then kind of stopped her car to look behind her, and then the thing was right behind her car and supposedly picked up the back of her car.
Yeah, no,
Right?
This is ringing a bell.
Yeah, I think that was reported on one of the papers. But like, he's like, but when I heard that story, because she told me, she told him when he started writing these articles, like, hey, I have a story. But he was telling me like once it came out, he's like, I had like police officers tell me they saw Bigfoot. He was like, he's like, I've known these people my whole life. He's like, can't tell you I believe in Bigfoot, but I definitely believe they're telling the truth. Like,
yeah,
the best of their ability, So
well, and that's how a lot of this ends up. Is like, well, I don't believe the story, but I believe the person. Like,
yeah.
So
I believe that they believe.
Yeah, which was Shermer, which is all these other people, where it's like, it's a very honest person. So something happened, and I don't know what, and just talk to them. Yeah, and like I hadn't realized the extent of like Nebraska Bigfoot stories. I had heard from a friend that there were some who was doing a documentary about the Nebrasquatch,
right,
and that sort of thing. But there was like when I recently got the like Fortean Research Society's book, it's like there's so many of them.
So many. Going way the fuck back too.
Yeah, and there was also like, I think we talked about via email, like the Milo Man, which was a sighting of like a large hairy humanoid, kind of similarly threatening a guy's car, and then it ended up that other farmers in the area had reported it. If you go to those cornfields, they get creepy. You can see how you'd get ambushed by something real tall, real hairy, real scary.
Yeah. That's like a slogan.
Yeah. Nebraska Tourism Bureau Bigfoot office.
Right. And I'm not sure how this is like, only I don't know how long they've been doing this or been public about it, I should say. But like on the Omaha Indian Reservation in Macy, they like the way, and I've talked to the Webster brothers, who are kind of in charge of investigating Bigfoot on the reservation, and they apparently, according to them, have so much Bigfoot activity that people like name specific ones. They walk through towns, people see them like in their yards, and it's like not a big deal. And he goes, well, our culture is not afraid of these things. We don't think they're flesh and blood creature. They think there are things that we can see sometimes, and sometimes we can't see them.
Yeah, well, and there's, from what I understand, I don't deeply know it, but I've talked to people who are members of the Omaha tribe. There was somebody I talked to at a MUFON meeting who had like a very like contactee-ish story, directly telling me like I wasn't abducted, I was like invited, and putting it in the context of like the mythology there that has a lot of like resemblances to like Sky Brothers or some kind of like metaphysical association there, where this is part of the thread of, again, I don't want to necessarily speak for them, but I'm kind of repeating back what was told to me.
Right.
Like
Right.
would be right in line with the Bigfoot, where it's like, here's this very like spiritual, ethereal thing that has this like resemblance, superficial or otherwise, to like these more modern mythologies.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, it's it's interesting. If you go like the Winnebago tribe, which is just north of them, they report the same thing. And then if you go like 2.5 hours northwest is Pine Ridge.
Yeah.
Which is pretty famous for Bigfoot activity and a lot of high strangeness. So,
yeah. Well, they also have the reports of just like kind of the like tall man type of things too up there, don't they? That are seen often as like kind of an omen of death.
Yep. I had a guest on my friend Lucinda, and she was actually able to go to Pine Ridge with Whitley Strieber and like a group of a few other people. And she had some absolutely really I shouldn't say crazy, but really profound experiences. She's been up there twice now. She went with Timothy Renner. I'm actually going to have her back on the show, and she's going to talk about her second trip there. And I know the story, and it is really it's amazing. Yeah. And I've known Lucinda for years now, and she's not a bullshit artist, So
yeah. And yeah, it's always good to know the people that aren't the bullshit artists here.
Right.
Where I've had family members tell me things that have happened to them, and those are people I love and trust. And so when you have like that sort of connection, some of the times it's harder to just like push it aside, to brush it off, to like chalk it up to exaggeration or demented fame seeking or that sort of thing, when it's somebody telling you something like personal.
Right. Well, do you think, I guess just kind of like in, first off, thank you so much for giving me so much of your time. We're going to have to do we're going to have to do a multi-part series on this for sure. But like, like, not that but do you have any, like, when you think of Nebraska, it is kind of like almost like that quintessential Midwest state. It's agriculture, farmers, salt of the earth, tight-lipped, honest and all that stuff. And I wonder, like, because I actually had this, like, not that I believe this, I had this notion that geography plays a part in all this stuff, and that people are connected to the land, and our mythologies are brought over from wherever we immigrated from, and it's a melting pot of weird folklore, from Welsh people, German people, indigenous cultures, and they all kind of get jumbled up and manifest in different ways. But is there something about Nebraska that you think is like a conductor for the weird?
I don't know, especially because, like you said, there's like tight-lipped. I don't know if you saw, but somebody recently had a thread on Twitter. I refuse to call it its new name.
Thank you.
That he was at like his wife was from Nebraska or something. They went back. They were at like a high school football game, which is what you do on some of the towns on a Friday night. And he had his, I think, father-in-law tell this story about something he saw land, and really was still like guarded and like tight-lipped about it. But was still like clearly very, very shaken by the experience. And so I do think that when things come out, it's almost like that was maybe what even Shermer was like going against the grain on, and why some of that happened to him is like, you just don't talk about these things. So
I think you kind of nailed it. I think that is maybe not so much, now in 2025, but I think in like the 20th century, that absolutely was the case. Even just knowing like my grandparents and stuff, it's like, you don't talk about weird stuff, man.
Yeah.
Keep that to yourself.
Yeah, no, and I think that there's people that will also relay things to you that's like, well, I don't necessarily believe in this, but
right.
But I think that's where you like end up having that kind of intersection of like, you don't talk about this with the people. I think that gives, the kind of aspect of like people's personal mythologies cropping up. And that also gives things where it's like, well, why do you have Bigfoot, and why do you have some of these other stories that none of these things really have a pattern to them other than kind of the like high strangeness aspects to them
Right.
of kind of very illusory things. And maybe that's the same way you're tight-lipped. You only let things out every now and then, is it's like almost your 30-second encounter with the shadows or the
Right.
kind of like other thing in the same way as there's that in the way you talk about it, ends up being just this thing that your encounter is fleeting.
Mm-hmm.
Because like I also know in Nebraska, I saw some shit in the sky. I don't know what it was. I'm not gonna say it's
right.
But like I remember I was sitting outside. I was probably like 13, height of like my X-Files fandom. I saw a fireball, like something very, very, very low,
Really?
to where it was seeming to go just like right over the rail yard, and it was this fleeting thing that happened that was like one of only a small handful of like my own personal, but it was like such a like very clear, very orange, very like I said, very fireball-ish.
Right.
But there was nothing really reported or anything like that. So like what the hell did I see while I was like waiting for my parents in the car outside of a Knights of Columbus hall?
Ooh, that's layered with symbolism right there, pal.
Yeah, well, and
that's esoteric as fuck.
That place when the Knights of Columbus moved out and a thrift store moved in was my Eagle Scout project to make this as small town as possible. But yeah, like I think you have almost these like passing in the night encounters for a lot of people that eventually set up fascinating patterns where it's like, well, nobody, you don't know there's a lot of Nebraska Bigfoot stories until you see somebody lay out all these disparate things, but they're also, each one seems just a little bit different, almost like it's like, you wouldn't say species, because if there's a Bigfoot, it's not a species to me.
Nebraska is the best example, almost, because like in terms of like forested states in the United States, we're low. Like eastern Nebraska has like tree line and forest, for sure, and so does northern Nebraska, but it is as flat and wide open as you could possibly find it in America.
Yeah. Well, and like the one like big forest there is completely human planted. It's not a natural forest, which also made it, when there was that big fire, made it like a tinder, because like or like it was all kind of there for the burning, just because it wasn't necessarily something that was supposed to be there,
right?
So yeah, there's where would these things even be able to hide?
That's exactly right.
People's like stories crop up, and but I think when you have a lot of like open space, you have a lot of like, I don't know, like open imagination. Or that.
No, I hear you. The thing is, I guess kind of going back to your point, it's like and I'm not saying, it's kind of like with the extraterrestrial hypothesis. That does not seem very likely to me. Yeah. So I will say the flesh and blood Bigfoot hypothesis does not seem likely to me. I feel like we'd find a fossil record. I feel like we would have just discovered it.
Yeah,
by now.
Yeah. You'd find something dead in a field at the very least.
I would think so, right? But I definitely could be wrong. What do I know? Well, many disagree with me on that.
I mean, even with the extraterrestrial, that makes it fascinating that you have all these UFO mythologies, but there's these people looking for other things, and it's going to be fascinating to see how it doesn't line up with the mythology. If there's ever something passing through a robotic probe, or you find something that was here long ago that's also like a ship kind of passing in the night. I do have one of my favorite rural, my area of the state things. If you're
please close us out with this.
There is an outsider artist. He wouldn't have regarded himself as an artist even, but he was from north of where I grew up. I think like just over a county line. Mm-hmm. His name was Emery Blagden. he was this man who was at one point kind of a hobo. He was riding the rails. He eventually inherited an uncle's farm. He had family members kind of die, tragic deaths of tragic illnesses. And it made him very obsessed with the idea that he could channel energies and electricity and all these things into like making a healing machine in his barn.
Yes, please.
And so it was like kind of made out of scraps, all these sorts of things. They're almost like mobiles, like like a hanging thing in this series of them. And the way he was kind of discovered was he would go into town to this pharmacy and go up to the pharmacist Dan Dryden and be like, I need elements. And okay, well, what does that mean? Trying to discern it. And eventually it came out that he was buying chemicals that would have reactions with like aluminum from like scrap aluminum or like aluminum cans or that sort of thing that would turn them certain colors. So he was almost this like outsider chemist too.
I love it.
And he was like a very polite man. My mom had a few encounters with him, and eventually he died. I believe of like a face cancer he didn't treat. So like the healing, I guess, had never quite taken hold there. But Dryden and another buddy who were at that point in like the art world heard that like the barn was possibly going to be demolished, and they like went up there and started collecting these. And it's done national tours. It's at the Kohler Preserve in Sheboygan, Wisconsin.
Amazing.
Actually reconstructed to as how the barn would have been in place. But I just found out a few weeks ago, my dad was like, oh yeah, your Uncle Gary loaned him a pickup to go pick up the first piece. It's like, how is this just coming to me now? Like, this is like one of my current obsessions is this, where it's also like, even if none of this exists, it's people's modes of belief. And this was a man that had a belief that, he could create something great that could like save himself and others from almost a family curse without using that terminology necessarily. So Emory Blagden is maybe my favorite Nebraskan that's adjacent to all of these things that created something great. If you ever make it up here, you need to go, just because like being in the midst of it, it still feels very like, in the same way as when you enter certain, even if you're not a religious person, you enter certain churches and you feel like an aura around that.
There's a power, there's a vibe,
There's a power, there's a vibe, there's something very peaceful about being among this like rubbish turned great thing. And so it's kind of like all these things we've talked about, like, even if these like fantastic forces don't exist, the way people come to those beliefs is absolutely just as fascinating to me. And what people say has happened to them is also like the internal psychology to it. Like I said, I've had family members confide of like ghost encounters. My sister has had things just kind of appear in her house. I know you're
apports. I love apports.
I know you're an apportation man. She recently had like a feather appear out of nowhere. Like,
the feather is a common one, by the way.
Yeah,
when I say common, I shouldn't say common, but it is one I have heard over and over again with apports.
She'll also just have butterflies land on her.
I love it.
And like, so there's all those sorts of things. And so there's like this other aspect of things that's this kind of like, I don't know, it's not anything that's like an official religious belief. There's this kind of weirdness around my family. I've had some odd things happen. I once heard a voice behind me in my house, and I thought it was my wife pranking me, because it said something like, I thought I heard like "gotcha." She and I used to like we had this apartment where the floors were very solid.
Right.
And we're both horror movie fans, and so we would hide and like try to spook each other. And I was always someone, but like we live in an old creaky house now, and so I assumed she like was really excited that she was able to sneak up on me. And when I heard this, and then I was like, she has a broken foot. She's and I had that, and like recently, we had what was supposed to be like a routine doctor's appointment turn into like a medical emergency. But like I inherited from my grandparents a commemorative Elvis Presley McCormick's whiskey bottle that a few weeks before I had seen like a something on the back of it that was like a slider. I was like, well, why would that be on there? This is a whiskey bottle. I pick it up, I look underneath, it's got a little wind thing to it. So I wind it, and it ends up, it plays like Love Me Tender,
Right.
which is a very sweet song. Like there's
Beautiful.
also, Elvis is a big part of my family. We have
Oh, yeah.
3 Elvis impersonators, including me.
What?
We just show up at family weddings. Like we act like there's the like big like security detail.
That's
You
amazing.
dance with the bride or the groom as like this sweet gesture to your cousin or your nephew or your sibling, that sort of thing. Like Elvis shows up. So like it's something very integral to my family, which is okay. So back to the bottle. I wind it up, it plays Love Me Tender, I let it go until the end of it. A month later, the same day as like this medical emergency, I was sitting, getting ready for work because it was what I assumed was a normal morning. And it played a few notes. And I was like, that's weird. And I like a little bit later, I like stood up and I approached it and it played a few more notes. I'm like,
As you approached it.
yeah. And I was like, okay, this is very weird. And I like texted a friend, like, I gotta burn down my house now.
Yeah.
I put a picture of this like stupid Kish Elvis whiskey decanter. And it ended up it belonged to my grandmother, and we had this very intense thing happen that day, and it just happened that morning that it played like notes of this very like lovely ballad. And there's all sorts of things that could have like happened, some the old house, something jostles loose, but like there's also the like a little bit too coincidental aspect where I'm just like still scratching my head about it, and I don't necessarily have any religious beliefs, but was it like I was being told it was going to be okay?
Yeah, I mean, look, if you're to take it anyway, I think that's the way to take it. I think you could take it as like, wow, what a lovely thing.
Well, and I miss my grandma, so it was nice to stop by.
Absolutely. Thanks, Grandma.
Yeah,
that's a sweet story.
Yeah.
That's a very sweet story.
Well, and like my family stories are typically very sweet. Like an aunt that went into a room and some woman who made her very calm said hello and said her name. And then my aunt kind of blinked and she was gone. And it's like those sorts of stories. And maybe there's something chemically that's happening to all of us that like
perhaps, but that's very interesting. I mean, I kind of doubt it. That seems like there's a genetical trait that makes you
well, I'm even talking like the way our brains are wired. Why is our brain I'm finding it fascinating enough that like why are our brains wired this way? People who report the same things, you almost wish we could wear a helmet and see what the patterns were and get into like, if none of this is real, can we like know from a like neuroscience perspective what's happening here?
Right.
I think that's the unfortunate thing about like science not wanting to touch the woo too much. Although you have near-death studies that has some really exciting things happening right now.
Yeah.
I know we're running a little long here, so we don't have to get into it. But like, it would be nice to know that if these things don't exist, but the stories recur, what is the hardwiring that is causing us to have common experiences?
Right. I mean, it almost like make me think more. even though I do think there's something to the collective unconscious, but it would almost reinforce the idea of collective unconscious, which is just as fascinating as,
well,
the manifestation of monsters and UFOs.
Collective unconscious could even just be like how we're wired and how the stories of all of us connect is societally, and that's why we also see an elf, or we see a gray, or we see
Exactly
all these sorts of things that become the like co-creative aspect that you often talk about. But it's also like, maybe this is part of our hard wiring, and we should know more about why that's happening. But there's also, there's also like, wasn't it eventually with like the Bentwater UFO thing that they began to suspect that it was like a plasma phenomenon more that was also kind of like scrambling somebody?
Yeah. Well, one of the guys touched the craft, and then he had like all these like, almost like Matrix download numbers, like, like it was like he was being like fed information or something.
The fact that the debunkers were even going with like a plasma phenomenon and that sort of thing. And there are plasma phenomenons out there.
Of course.
That went from like that doesn't exist to like, ball lightning is real. The sprites in the sky are real. So maybe there's something that happens to us that's like scrambling us, which is why I say like, also I wish there was like, okay, a lot of UFOs are reported here. Well, can you get a mycologist out? Can you see if this is a fungal thing? Can you see why? So like, I would love.
You brought up the mycologist thing. I feel like we're probably don't have time to go into this case because it's an in-depth one. I would recommend listeners and you, especially if you're interested in stuff, look up the Delphos, Kansas case. DELPHOS. It's a very important case, and mycology plays a little part in it.
Yeah. No, I know I've read it. And
you probably have. Refresh yourself. It is. I'm actually. I wrote a letter to the Ronnie Johnson is still alive. The guy. He was a boy at the time, but I'm trying to get him to come on my show.
Yeah.
But I would even drive to his house like 5 hours away and do the interview there.
Yeah.
I love the case so much. It's a really, really good one.
We'll keep it to Nebraska, even if I have some Kansas truth. We'll keep We'll let him talk to Kansas.
That's exactly right. John, dude, this has been so much fun. This is such a treat for me.
I've looked forward to this. This has been great.
Thank you.
I loved our chance to kind of like nerd out in this, and yeah, I know my brain can take winding paths. So
is mine. I mean, man, that's just how my brain works. But that's how I like these conversations to flow. These are just jumping off points, and it goes where it wants to go. But I mean, like, there's so many things we didn't even discuss. There's a vampire case. There's alien black cats, which there's a ton of reports going back way over 100 years of Black Panther sightings.
Well, we didn't get into like the fun like monster weird things where sometimes it's like out of place species, or there's just things that are like
kangaroo sightings, the upas. I mean,
kangaroo.
Dude, there's a Gumby sighting. I mean, we're gonna do part 2 of this coming soon.
Absolutely,
we have to, because I wrote a basic list, and the list was like 40 things, and in my files I have hundreds.
I completely forgot about phantom kangaroos, and I love them so much.
Oh, dude, yes.
Collage projects with Fate magazines, but setting aside articles that interest me, and one of them is phantom kangaroos.
Oh man, I'm a massive UPA fan. I could talk about UPAs all day.
Yeah, out of place anything is just as fascinating to me as like like we had an out of place some kind of huge fish in like a reservoir lake that people don't like. They were like, well, was this a dumped off like pet? Was this a circus coming through?
Right.
Was this accidentally stocked in the lake and like was able to grow over time? It was a paddlefish, and it was killed by like a boat, and you can authenticate it, and it's a species we know. That's not supposed to be there. That's much more of like a Mississippi River species, I think.
Yeah. Out of place animals, I could pretty much talk about them the rest of my life and just be fine just talking about that. They're beautiful.
We got to bookmark this for next time.
Yeah. Well, we have a lot to get into. We did not cover, in some of the best ones we didn't even scratch the surface.
Yeah.
But my friend, this was so much fun. Is there a place like your social media, like or wherever that people can, reach out to you, keep in contact?
Yeah. So, johnwenz.com is my website. It's more of like my science writing than anything, but it has some links to like book projects and stuff. But I also have like an Instagram where I've been putting a lot of my like Fortean related art. It's dumb art finsta. So dumb, like unintelligent art, like everybody knows what art is. And then FINSTA. I've been painting a lot of when I first hurt my hand, I was doing a lot of finger paintings of like weird content-y stories or otherwise like things where people physically took something away that I'm like currently turning into a zine. So
oh God, I
once
love
that happens, that'll be up on that Instagram. So I hope people will follow there. I'm also on Blue Sky at John Wenz. I'm not super active, but I'm on there.
Yeah.
But I'd say that those would be the big social places to find me. And I'd love if people saw and enjoyed what I painted in various mediums. And, I also intend to have eventually a zine come out. It's like
hell yeah,
collages of old Fate magazines.
Yes, please.
Like there will be pages of psychic stuff.
Well, you've shown me some of his work. You've shown me some of your work, and it is fucking great. It is so my alley, man.
Thank you. I'm blushing a little, right?
Well, Fortean art is my favorite kind of art, my friend. John, you are a legend. Thank you for. It's nice to know. Really, when we met, it was a relief to know. Wow, someone knows about this deep, like obscure Nebraska lore. Because let me tell you. No one else in the state. I mean, like, yes, other people do know for sure. I'm thinking, but as a whole, 99% of people don't know anything about Nebraska folklore, and that's okay. They're just not interested. But like, we have to preserve this, my friend. It's up to us.
Yeah, absolutely. I love what you're doing because of that. Because there hasn't been people that are really like carrying that torch, and it sounds like you're investigating things, and that's awesome. You can't quite see it because my lighting is bad, but there's actually a painting behind me that is both a combination of like Baba Yaga mythology, the like witch, but like I'm theming it around, the Bloody Mary story. I know.
Sure.
It was like a woman who dressed very old fashioned, and she began to be interpreted as a ghost, and it ended a tragedy. So the painting, which will go up soon, I'm still like trying to put the finishing touches on it. There's children's eyes that I just can't nail. I'm so angry every Saturday when I try. But it's themed around that, where it's like Baba Yaga wanting to be left alone. She's just an old woman with a chicken hut on legs, foraging in the woods, that these children are turning into this like interpretation of somewhere between like supernatural and evil. So that's actually like a painting that is a Nebraska painting. And so I'm really excited once I'm ready to like show that off, because it's been something I've been working on for like 2 months.
Oh man, I can't wait to see it. That's right up my alley.
Yeah.
Hell yes. John, dude, this is so much fun. Folks, thank you so much for listening to another episode of Hi Strangeness. John, do you want to tell the folks to enjoy their dinner for me?
You should enjoy your dinner on behalf of Steve and myself. Steve, when you went to the bathroom, I admitted to them that my dinner tonight was just Taco Bell.
Well, I can't think of a better Wednesday night dinner. I
fucking love Taco Bell. Like, every Wednesday, it's usually some form of like Mexican takeout.
Yep.
And then it's like cooking the other nights of the week, or like Wisconsin fish fry.
Look, we could do a whole episode about what Wisconsin fish fry. Well, here, we're going to talk off the air right now about fish fries and my upcoming Wisconsin travels. Friends, thank you so much for listening to this episode. Really have a great day and a great dinner. Let's say goodbye to them at the same time. 1, 2, 3. Bye. Bye.